The silence in the dining room was so heavy it felt suffocating. I stared at my sister, waiting for a punchline that never came. Then I looked at my parents, expecting outrage. Instead, my mother carefully dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin, and my father just looked away. If you look up the term glass child or family scapegoat in a psychology textbook, you might just find a picture of me, Chloe. For 28 years, I existed in the margins of my own family. I wasn't neglected in the traditional, visible sense. I had a roof over my head, clothes on my back, and decent meals. But emotionally, I was a ghost haunting a house that belonged entirely to my younger sister, Brittany. Brittany was 26, but in our parents' eyes, she was frozen in a perpetual state of being an innocent, gifted toddler who needed constant applause. She was the golden child. When I got a B+ in advanced calculus, my father, Arthur, asked why it wasn't an A. When Brittany managed a C in remedial math, my mother, Brenda, threw a dinner party to celebrate her perseverance. I learned early on that the only way to survive the crushing weight of their indifference was to become fiercely independent. I paid my own way through a state college by working double shifts at a diner, graduated with honors, and built a solid career as an architectural draftsperson. I bought a modest townhouse, adopted a rescue greyhound named Barnaby, and tried to build a quiet, peaceful life. Brittany, meanwhile, dropped out of a ridiculously expensive private university after 3 semesters because the professors didn't understand her creative vision. My parents absorbed her $60,000 tuition debt without a single complaint. Since then, she had bounced from one funded passion project to another, a failed jewelry line, a disastrous stint as a lifestyle influencer, and most recently, an event planning business that consisted mostly of her planning her own lavish vacations. Through it all, Brenda and Arthur kept the bank of Mom and Dad wide open for her. They remortgaged their home. They dipped into their retirement. Whenever I gently tried to warn them that they were jeopardizing their future, I was immediately shut down and labeled jealous and unsupportive. The breaking point, the night my entire reality shattered, was supposed to be a joyous occasion. It was Brenda and Arthur's 30th wedding anniversary. Naturally, Brittany had appointed herself the creative director of the celebration, which meant she picked an outrageously expensive, pretentious French restaurant downtown called L'Étoile d'Or, made the reservation, and then explicitly texted me a week prior. "Hey Chloe, just a heads up. The dinner is $250 a plate. Mom and Dad shouldn't have to pay on their anniversary, and Harrison and I are saving for the wedding, so we figured you'd cover the bill as your gift to them. See you Saturday." Shocksho. Harrison was Brittany's fiancé. He was a slick, impossibly polished guy in corporate real estate who wore suits that cost more than my car. He drove a pristine Porsche, constantly name-dropped local politicians, and treated me like I was the hired help. If he was so wealthy, I never understood why they were always saving and pushing expenses onto me, but I didn't want to ruin my parents' milestone. I swallowed my pride, transferred funds from my emergency savings, and agreed to pay the bill. I wanted to do something sentimental, too. For 6 months, I had secretly worked with a professional archivist to restore and digitize my parents' damaged wedding video, which had been ruined in a basement flood a decade ago. It cost me a small fortune and countless hours of tracking down audio software to fix the warped sound, but I knew my mother had cried over losing that tape. I had it beautifully packaged in a custom velvet box with a polished silver USB drive and a portable digital screen. When I arrived at L'Étoile d'Or, the hostess led me to a secluded private room in the back. Brittany, Harrison, and my parents were already there, laughing loudly over a bottle of vintage champagne. "Oh, look who decided to show up," Brittany drawled, swirling her glass. She was wearing a designer silk dress that I instantly recognized from a boutique downtown, a dress that cost easily $1,000. "I'm 10 minutes early, Britt," I said evenly, taking the empty seat at the end of the table, furthest from my parents. "Well, we started the champagne without you," Arthur said, barely glancing up from his menu. Harrison was just telling us about the new commercial property he's acquiring, a multi-million-dollar deal. Isn't that right, Harry? It's nothing, Arthur. Really, Harrison said with fake modesty, shooting a smug look at Brittany. Just a little strip mall revitalization. Keeps the lights on. I smiled politely and placed my velvet box on the table. Happy anniversary, Mum. Dad, I brought you something special. Brenda looked at the box, her expression unreadable. Before she could reach for it, Brittany dramatically clapped her hands. Oh, let's do gifts during dessert, Chloe. God, you always rush things. Let's just enjoy the ambience. I pulled my hand back. Sure, that's fine. The dinner was an agonizing marathon of passive-aggressive digs. Every time I tried to join the conversation, I was cut off. When I mentioned that my firm had just promoted me to senior draftsperson, my mother immediately pivoted. That's nice, dear. Oh, Brittany, tell us more about your wedding floral arrangements. Have you decided between the white orchids or the peonies? I sat there, eating my overpriced sea bass, feeling the familiar, hollow ache in my chest. I was paying for this entire evening. I was the one who had made sure the restaurant accommodated my father's severe shellfish allergy by calling the chef personally 3 days ago. Yet, I was completely invisible. As the waiter cleared our main courses, I watched Brittany lean over to Harrison and whisper something, giggling maliciously while looking directly at my sensible, off-the-rack navy blazer. I had had enough. I took a deep breath, deciding that for once in my 28 years, I wasn't going to let a slide go unaddressed. Is something funny, Brittany? I asked, my voice calm but loud enough to cut through the ambient jazz playing in the room. The table went completely still. Harrison stopped swirling his wine. My mother frowned, her perfectly drawn eyebrows pulling together in irritation. Excuse me? Brittany blinked, playing the picture of wide-eyed innocence. You and Harrison were looking at me and laughing. I just wondered what the joke was. I'd love to laugh too, I said, keeping my posture straight. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my voice remained remarkably steady. Chloe, please, Arthur sighed, rubbing his temples. Don't start your drama tonight. It's our anniversary. I'm not starting drama, Dad. I asked a simple question. I looked back at my sister. Well? Brittany's innocent facade dropped, replaced by a cold, calculating sneer. She leaned forward, crossing her arms over the table. You really want to know? Harrison and I were just remarking on how sad it is that you wore that to a fine dining establishment. But then again, you've always been completely out of touch with how the real world works. It's embarrassing. Embarrassing? I let out a dry, humorless laugh. I'm paying for this entire dinner. Brittany, you explicitly texted me and told me to foot the bill because you couldn't afford it. Harrison bristled, his face flushing red. Now wait a minute. Is that true, Brittany? Brenda gasped, looking at her golden child. For a split second, I thought I finally had them. I thought my mother would see through the lies, but Brittany didn't even flinch. She just rolled her eyes and sighed dramatically. Oh my God, Mum, no. I suggested we split it, and Chloe threw a massive fit, insisting she had to pay to prove some weird point, because she's always trying to compete with Harrison's success. I just let her have her way because you know how unhinged she gets. That is a complete lie. I pushed my chair back slightly. I have the text message right here on my phone. I reached into my purse, my hands shaking with adrenaline. Put the phone away, Chloe, Arthur snapped. His voice was sharp, a whip cracking in the small room. I will not have you ruining this evening with your petty jealousy. Your sister has a lot on her plate with the wedding, and you have always been so utterly resentful of her happiness. I froze. The phone slipped from my grasp, landing with a soft thud at the bottom of my bag. I looked at my father, the man who was supposed to protect me, and then at my mother, who was nodding in agreement with him. Resentful? I whispered, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I have supported this family my entire life. I have asked for nothing. I didn't ask for a dime for college. I didn't ask you to co-sign my mortgage. I just sit here, and I take her insults, and I take your indifference, and I just try to be a part of this family." Brittany let out a short, cruel laugh. It was a sound I will never forget for as long as I live. "A part of this family?" she mocked, tilting her head. She looked at me not with anger, but with absolute, chilling pity. "Chloe, wake up! Do you honestly think anyone here wants you around?" The air left my lungs. Brittany leaned in closer, delivering the final, fatal blow with perfect articulation. "Actually, nobody here even likes you. They just tolerate you because they feel sorry for you. You're depressing, you're single, you're bitter, and you bring everyone down. Mum and Dad complain about having to invite you to things all the time. The silence that followed wasn't just heavy. It was a physical weight pressing down on my skull. The jazz music faded into white noise. I didn't look at Brittany. I didn't look at Harrison, who was smirking into his water glass. Slowly, agonizingly, I turned my head to look at my parents. This was it. This was the line. Surely, even in their blinding favoritism, they couldn't allow such a horrific, deeply cruel thing to be said. I waited for my mother to gasp, for my father to slam his hand on the table and demand an apology. My mother carefully dabbed her mouth with her linen napkin. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She looked down at her plate, examining a leftover sprig of parsley. My father cleared his throat. He shifted uncomfortably, adjusted his tie, and finally looked at me. "Now, Chloe," he murmured, his voice completely devoid of warmth, "your sister's delivery was a bit harsh. But she has a point. You do make things very difficult. Your energy is always so tense. We just want peace. She has a point. Something inside me, some fragile, bruised tether that had kept me desperately tied to these people for 28 years, simply snapped. There was no explosion. There was no screaming. There was just a sudden, absolute clarity. It was as if I had been trying to read a book in a dark room my whole life, and someone had finally flipped the light switch. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a punching bag. I was an ATM. I was an inconvenience. I stood up. I didn't rush. I smoothly picked up my purse. Then I reached across the table and picked up the velvet box containing the restored wedding video. "What are you doing?" Brenda asked, looking alarmed for the first time. "That's our gift." "Not anymore," I said, my voice eerily calm. I sounded like a stranger to myself. "Oh, let her go, Mum," Brittany groaned. "She's doing her dramatic exit routine. And don't worry about the bill, Chloe. We don't want your tainted money anyway. Harrison will gladly cover it. Right, babe?" Harrison puffed out his chest. "Of course. Put the card away, Chloe. I've got this." "Great," I said. I didn't argue. I didn't throw my card down to prove a point. I just walked to the door of the private room. Before I left, I turned back one last time. "Happy anniversary," I said softly. "Have a wonderful life. All of you." I walked out of l'Etoile d'Or into the crisp night air. I didn't cry. The tears wouldn't come. The betrayal was too deep, too absolute to be expressed with something as simple as crying. I got into my car, locked the doors, and sat in the dark parking lot for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. As I sat there, trying to steady my breathing before turning the ignition, the heavy wooden side door of the restaurant, the one leading to the alleyway where employees took smoke breaks, banged open. A figure stepped out into the shadows. It was Harrison. He didn't see my car idling in the darkest corner of the lot. He was pacing furiously, pulling at his expensive tie, his slicked back hair suddenly looking messy. He had a phone pressed to his ear, and he was practically hyperventilating. I rolled down my window just an inch. The alleyway acted like an acoustic funnel, carrying his frantic, hushed voice straight to me. "I told you I need more time," Harrison hissed into the phone, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "I can't just materialize 50 grand, Marco. You said you'd give me until the end of the month." No, don't go to her parents," If Brittany finds out I'm tapped out, the wedding is off, and the whole plan goes to hell. Her parents have equity. I just need to marry her first to get access to it. He paused, listening to whoever was on the other line, his face pale under the flickering yellow street lamp. I'm trying, he pleaded, sounding entirely unlike the arrogant man who had just sneered at me inside. But the sister didn't pay the dinner bill tonight. I have to put this $3,000 tab on my last maxed out card and pray it goes through. Just give me 2 more weeks. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, my breath catching in my throat. The golden child's perfect, multi-millionaire fiancé wasn't rich. He was broke. He was in massive debt to someone named Marco, and he was explicitly planning to con my parents out of their home equity. A slow, cold realization washed over me. Brittany had pushed me out, convinced she had secured the ultimate prize. My parents had discarded me, banking their entire future on their golden daughter and her wealthy savior, and they were all about to lose everything. I rolled the window back up, quietly put the car in drive, and pulled out of the parking lot without turning my headlights on until I was halfway down the street. I was done being the family scapegoat. It was time to sit back and watch the karma unfold. The drive home from L'Étoile d'Or was the quietest 30 minutes of my life. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thumping of my own heartbeat. When I finally pulled into the driveway of my townhouse, my rescue greyhound, Barnaby, was waiting by the front window. Walking inside, hanging up my keys, and burying my face in his warm, soft fur, I finally let out a long, ragged exhale. I didn't cry. The overwhelming emotion wasn't sadness. It was a profound, almost dizzying sense of relief. For 28 years, I had been carrying a boulder up a mountain, desperately hoping my parents would eventually meet me at the top and say, "Good job, Chloe. We love you." Hearing my sister vocalize the family's true feelings and watching my parents silently endorse it had finally severed the chain tying me to that boulder. I let it roll away. The next morning, I woke up and enacted a complete, surgical removal of my family from my daily life. I didn't write a dramatic manifesto or send a tearful goodbye text. I simply went into my phone settings and blocked Arthur, Brenda, and Brittany. I blocked them on all social media. I blocked Harrison. I even set up an email filter that sent anything from their domains directly into a hidden archive folder. For the first 2 months, the silence was intoxicating. I threw myself entirely into my work at the architectural firm, without the constant, low-level anxiety of my family's impending demands. "Chloe, can you pick up Brittany's dry cleaning? Chloe, we need you to chip in for a new water heater. Because we paid for Brittany's trip to Tulum, my career flourished. My promotion to senior draftsperson came with a significant raise, and I started saving to renovate my kitchen. I was sleeping better. My skin cleared up. It was as if I had been allergic to my own bloodline. Of course, in a dysfunctional family system, the scapegoat is never allowed to just walk away quietly. When the designated punching bag disappears, the toxic energy has nowhere to go, and the structure begins to wobble. The first crack in the foundation reached me through my mother's sister, Aunt Valerie. Valerie was the family's premier gossip and self-appointed peacekeeper. 3 months after the anniversary dinner, she ambushed me at my local grocery store, cornering me between the organic apples and the citrus display. "Chloe!" "Thank goodness," Aunt Valerie gasped, clutching her purse to her chest. "Your mother has been beside herself. Why are your calls going straight to voicemail? It's been months." I changed my settings. "Aunt Valerie," I said calmly, inspecting a grapefruit. "I needed some space." "Space? Chloe, be reasonable. The wedding is only 4 months away." Valerie leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "And frankly, they need you. Things are tense." I paused, looking at her. "Tense how?" Valerie sighed, looking around as if someone might overhear us. "Well, between you and me, Brittany is a wreck. The wedding budget has ballooned out of control. It's $250,000, Chloe. And Harrison, well, His wealth is apparently tied up in some very complicated offshore escrow accounts. He's liquidating assets, but it takes time. Your father had to step in and cover the deposits for the venue and the florist last week. He had to take out a second mortgage on the house. My stomach did a slow, cold flip. A second mortgage. Harrison was actually doing it. He was draining them dry. A part of the old Chloe, the desperate, approval-seeking daughter, wanted to scream, to shake Aunt Valerie, to drive to my parents' house and expose Harrison's alleyway phone call. But the new Chloe remembered the absolute disdain in my father's eyes when he told me my energy was too tense. If I tried to warn them, they would accuse me of trying to ruin Brittany's happiness out of spite. They would double down. That sounds like a difficult situation for them, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I placed the grapefruit in my basket. But it's not my situation. Tell Mum and Dad I wish them the best. I walked away, leaving Aunt Valerie standing, open-mouthed in the produce aisle. 2 weeks later, the storm finally reached my front door. It was a rainy Tuesday evening. I was sitting on my sofa, reviewing blueprints on my tablet, when the doorbell rang. Barnaby let out a low bark. I glanced at the security camera feed on my phone and froze. It was Brittany. She was standing on my porch, holding an umbrella, looking noticeably thinner and incredibly frantic. I debated ignoring her, but I knew she would just keep ringing. I walked to the door, unlocked it, and opened it just enough to stand in the frame, blocking her from looking inside. "What do you want, Brittany?" "Oh my God, finally!" she snapped, shaking her umbrella out. Her tone was the same old arrogant drawl, but her eyes were wild, rimmed with smeared mascara. "Do you have any idea how childish you're being? Mom is a mess. You're trying to ruin my wedding process." "I have removed myself from your wedding process entirely," I replied. "You said nobody liked me, and I brought everyone down. I took your feedback and left. You should be thrilled. Now, why are you on my porch?" Brittany faltered. She crossed her arms, shivering slightly in the damp air. The arrogant facade slipped, just for a second, revealing sheer panic underneath. "Look," she started, clearing her throat. "Harrison is finalizing a massive commercial acquisition. It's a $30 million deal, but the SEC regulations are locking down his liquid cash for a mandatory audit period. It's totally standard for high net worth individuals." She recited the excuse as if she had rehearsed it 50 times in the mirror. "Fascinating," I said dryly. And the caterer is threatening to cancel if they don't get the final $50,000 payment by Friday," she blurted out, her voice rising in pitch. "Dad is tapped out until his retirement funds clear next quarter. I need you to co-sign a short-term personal loan for me. Just for 3 months. Harrison will pay you back with 20% interest once his funds are released." I stared at her. The sheer audacity of it was almost poetic. She had publicly humiliated me, declared me unlovable, and now she was standing on my porch demanding I put my own credit on the line to fund a party I wasn't even invited to. "No," I said simply. "Chloe, please!" Brittany's voice cracked. She grabbed the edge of the doorframe. "If the caterer walks, the whole wedding falls apart. The venue requires their exclusive caterer. It's 50 grand. You have excellent credit." "I know you do. Dad said so." I said no, Brittany. I leaned closer to her, lowering my voice so the rain wouldn't drown it out. "But if Harrison needs 50 grand so desperately, why doesn't he just ask Marco for an extension?" Brittany froze. All the colour instantly drained from her face. She looked at me as if I had just spoken to her in ancient Aramaic. Who is Marco?" "Ask your multi-millionaire fiancé," I whispered. "And never come to my house again." I shut the door in her face and locked the deadbolt. As I walked back to my living room, my hands were shaking, but a cold, hard smile was spreading across my face. The fuse was lit. The implosion didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, agonizing bleed, stretched over the final 2 months leading up to the wedding date. Through the family grapevine, mostly Aunt Valerie leaving long, unhinged voicemails that I occasionally listened to for morbid curiosity, I learned that my mention of Marco had caused a massive blowout between Brittany and Harrison. Harrison had smoothly lied his way out of it, claiming Marco was a ruthless hedge fund manager trying to undercut his acquisitions. My parents, absolutely terrified of losing their connection to unimaginable wealth, swallowed the lie whole. To prove his loyalty to the family, Harrison had come up with a brilliant solution to the wedding cash flow problem. He convinced my father, Arthur, to invest the remaining equity of his home, a staggering $150,000, into a guaranteed, fast-yield bridge loan for his real estate firm. Harrison promised that within 30 days, the return would pay for the entire wedding, the honeymoon to the Maldives, and leave Arthur with a hefty profit for his retirement. Arthur, blinded by greed and a desperate need to feel like a high-rolling investor alongside his golden son-in-law, signed the papers. He wired the funds to an LLC Harrison had set up. The wedding day was scheduled for the second Saturday in October. It was supposed to be the social event of the season, held at a historic, sprawling estate overlooking the river. I spent that Saturday morning repotting my indoor plants and listening to a true crime podcast. I had a yoga class scheduled for noon, followed by a quiet lunch with a friend. My life was peaceful. At 10:45 a.m., my phone rang. It wasn't an unknown number. It was my mother's cell phone. I had unblocked her a week prior, strictly because a dark, undeniable part of me knew the climax was coming, and I wanted a front row seat to the karma. I let it ring 3 times before hitting accept. I didn't say hello. Chloe? Brenda's voice was unrecognizable. It was a ragged, hyperventilating wheeze. Chloe, please, please, you have to come. You have to come right now. Come where, Mom? I'm not invited to the wedding, remember? I kept my tone breezy, inspecting a fern leaf. There is no wedding, she shrieked, the sound tearing through the phone speaker. He's gone, Chloe. He's gone, and the money is gone, and the police are here. Please, your father is having chest pains. We need you. I stopped touching the fern. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When I pulled up to the iron gates of the historic estate, the scene was one of absolute, cinematic chaos. 2 police cruisers were parked awkwardly on the manicured gravel driveway. A group of bridesmaids in sage green silk dresses were huddled on the grand stone steps, crying and aggressively hitting vape pens. Caterers were aggressively loading silver warming trays back into a box truck, yelling at a panicked wedding planner. I walked past the chaos, my boots crunching on the gravel, until I found my family in the estate's opulent bridal suite. The room looked like a bomb had gone off. Champagne flutes were shattered on the hardwood floor. Brittany was sitting on a velvet settee, wearing a breathtaking $15,000 custom lace gown. Her veil was torn, her makeup was running down her face in thick black rivers, and she was staring blankly at the wall, rocking slightly back and forth. Arthur was slumped in a wingback chair, an oxygen mask over his face, being tended to by a paramedic. He looked like he had aged 20 years since the anniversary dinner. His skin was grey. Brenda saw me and practically threw herself across the room, grabbing my arms with a desperate, bruising grip. Chloe! Thank God! Thank God you're here! She sobbed, her perfectly styled hair falling in messy clumps around her face. What happened, Mom? I asked, gently but firmly prying her hands off my arms. I took a step back to maintain my physical boundary. He's gone, Brenda wailed, gesturing wildly to the empty room. Harrison! He never showed up to the hotel this morning. His phone is disconnected. His groomsmen haven't seen him since Wednesday, and the venue coordinator came in an hour ago. His final checks bounced. Chloe! All of them! The venue, the caterer, the florist. I looked over at Arthur, who had pulled the oxygen mask down. He looked at me, with hollow, terrified eyes. The LLC, Arthur rasped, his voice weak and trembling. The bridge loan. I called my bank. The account he had me wire the money to was emptied yesterday morning, transferred to an offshore account in the Caymans. It's gone, Chloe. My retirement, the equity, everything. The puzzle pieces clicked together with brutal, perfect clarity. Harrison had never intended to marry Brittany. He just needed to string her along long enough to gain Arthur's absolute trust. The $150,000 from my parents' home equity wasn't for a wedding, and it wasn't for an investment. It was Harrison's escape fund. He probably paid off Marco just enough to keep his legs from being broken, took the rest of my parents' life savings, and vanished. "I don't understand," Brittany suddenly whispered, her voice tight and hysterical. She finally turned to look at me, her eyes manic. "He loved me. He bought me a 2-carat diamond. We were going to buy a house in the hills. The diamond is cubic zirconia, Brit," a police officer said gently from the doorway, holding a jeweler's loop and the engagement ring. "We just had the estate's private appraiser look at it while we wait for the fraud detectives. The metal is cheap brass plated in platinum. It's worth maybe $200. Brittany let out a sound that I can only describe as the scream of a dying animal. She buried her face in her hands and wailed. Brenda turned back to me, her eyes wide with a frantic, sickeningly familiar expectation. "Chloe, listen to me. The venue is threatening to sue us for the remaining balance. We have nothing in the checking accounts. The credit cards are maxed from the dress and the deposits. We are going to lose the house. You have to help us. You have that savings account, right? And your house has a guest room. We might need to stay with you while we figure this out." I stood in the center of the opulent, ruined bridal suite. I looked at my mother, who even now, in the midst of total devastation, was trying to assign me the role of the fixer. I looked at my father, who had handed a conman the keys to his financial life simply because the conman wore a nice suit and flattered his ego. And I looked at my sister, the golden child, who had built her entire identity on a throne of lies. "No," I said. My voice was steady, calm, and absolute. Brenda blinked, confused. "What do you mean, no?" "Chloe, this is an emergency. We are your family." "No, Mom," I corrected her gently. "I am the scapegoat. I am the bitter, depressing daughter who brings everyone down. I am the one nobody likes." "Chloe, please don't do this now." "We didn't mean that," Brenda pleaded, reaching for me again. I stepped back out of her reach. "You did mean it. You all meant it. You made your choices. You chose the illusion over reality. You chose a conman over your own daughter because he told you what you wanted to hear. And I told you the truth." Arthur let out a ragged sob, putting his head in his hands. "Chloe, please, we are going to be homeless. Then you better start looking for an apartment you can afford on your Social Security," I said, looking directly at my father. "Because you are not moving into my house, and I am not giving you a single dime." I turned around and walked toward the door. "You can't just leave us here!" Brittany screamed from the sofa, throwing a shattered champagne flute across the room. It smashed against the wall far away from me. "You owe us! You owe this family!" I paused in the doorway and looked back at her over my shoulder. "I don't owe you anything, Brittany. I paid for my own dinner. Remember?" I walked out of the suite, down the grand staircase, and past the police cars. I got into my car, started the engine, and finally turned on the radio. The sun was shining. The air felt lighter than it had in years. I put the car in drive and left them in the ruins of the life they had built for themselves. 2 weeks later, a financial crimes detective named Ramirez confirmed what I already knew. Harrison was actually Bradley Jenkins, a mid-level grifter with a severe gambling debt to a Chicago bookie. The $150,000 he drained from my father's home equity was instantly laundered through offshore cryptocurrency accounts. The money was gone, and Bradley was a ghost. The fallout was merciless. Unable to pay their bloated mortgages without Dad's retirement funds, my parents faced immediate foreclosure. They were forced out of their sprawling suburban home and into a cramped, noisy apartment in the city's industrial district. At 68, Arthur had to take a minimum wage job greeting customers at a hardware store just to keep the lights on, while Brenda swallowed her lifelong snobbery to work a discount retail returns register. But karma saved its best work for Brittany. Because she had signed all the vendor contracts in her own name to boost her fake event planning business, she was legally on the hook for $80,000 in unpaid wedding bills. She declared Chapter 7 bankruptcy at 26. With her credit destroyed and her luxury SUV repossessed, she had to move into our parents' tiny spare room. To pay her court fees, she got a job at the exact same greasy spoon diner she used to mock me for working at during college. When they inevitably showed up at my office parking lot begging for a small loan, I didn't even roll down my car window. I just shook my head and drove away. The next morning, I had my lawyer send a certified cease and desist letter, threatening a harassment lawsuit if they ever contacted me again. The silence that followed was permanent, and it was glorious. Blood doesn't always make a family, and shared DNA is never a license for abuse. Walking away from my parents and sister was the most painful, yet necessary, decision I ever made. Today, my life is filled with genuine love, chosen family, and absolute peace. Sometimes, the only way to win a rigged game is to simply stop playing. Let their karma be their problem. My bright future is mine.